The fifth word of Christ from the cross is, I am thirsty. We find this in John 19, 28 and 29. This fifth word of Jesus on the cross is very simple, and it is a short statement. Now in Greek it is just one word, dipso. This is a statement we ourselves have made several times, isn't it? Now we have said several times, I am thirsty. So it is a human expression of Jesus' physical suffering. We see here the full humanity of Christ. We see here the intensity of Christ's suffering. Of all the needs of the human body, thirst is by far the most agonizing one. If we have experienced it, we know it is one of the most agonizing, painful one. Now one can endure hunger for a few days. It is not a problem. It is amazing how much of physical pain our body can absorb. But thirst is like a consuming fire. Now next to oxygen, water is the most important part in our life. In this word, we find the Son of God pleading for a little water to moisten his lips and tongue and throat. He cries, I am thirsty. Though Psalm 22 was written even before crucifixion was known to the world, it perfectly pictures the suffering of the Messiah with regard to this word. Psalm 22 verse 15, we find the psalmist says, my mouth is dried up like a piece of broken pot, and my tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. Now it pictures the suffering of Messiah here when he says, I thirst. According to historians, one of the worst pains of the cross is the need for water. As the victim hung on the cross, their mouths and throat dried up and they cried for water. And thirst is evidence of physical suffering. The last time Christ had anything to drink was at the Last Supper. Since then, for 18 hours, he has not taken any fluids. During these 18 hours, he had lost a considerable part of his body fluids. For example, in the Garden of Gethsemane, when he prayed, his sweat was like drops of blood. When the soldiers whipped his back and put the crown of thorns on his head, we know that he lost most precious fluid from his body. Then for a long time, he was forced to walk from one place to another in the process of sentencing him. Now he was taken to Annas, then Caiaphas, then Pilate, then Herod, then again back to Pilate, and then the long way up the mountain to Golgotha. And even on the cross, his wounds continued to bleed. He hung beneath the sun, the heat of the noonday sun. So of course, it is possible to know how much he was dehydrated. He was completely dehydrated. Now, we cannot see a more personal God anywhere. The one who could turn water into wine is now thirsting for a few drops of water. The one who could walk on the water is reduced to I thirst. The one who miraculously fed a great crowd of people, is now longing for a small amount of water. Now, John writing this gospel at the end of the first century, probably it is believed that John writes this gospel towards the end of the first century, close to 90 AD. He was trying to counter the false teachings that circulated at that time, like Gnosticism, that claimed that Jesus was divine and not human, and so he did not suffer physical pain. In such context, this statement, I thirst, states that there is no drama happening here in the cross. It is literally Jesus suffering there. It is not God pretending to die. No, it is literally God dying. It is not a fake encounter. It is a real death on the cross. That is why Jesus refused the vinegar that was offered to him by the soldiers. And the thirst also, this word I thirst also has a symbolic meaning, because thirst has a much broader meaning in the Gospels. And only John writes this word, and John's Gospel is often symbolic. Symbolic means it has two levels of meaning. John's Gospel is nicknamed as the Gospel of water, Because we see from chapter 1 till the last chapter, in almost every chapter, there is at least one reference to water. The first 9 chapters at least have one reference, and the remaining chapters, most of the chapters, has a reference to water. So in a gospel which is flooded with water, Jesus is thirsty. So definitely that is symbolic. If you remember the incident of Jesus meeting the Samaritan woman in John chapter 4, where we find Jesus asking the Samaritan woman for water to drink. It was not just water Jesus was referring to. It was not just to physical water Jesus was referring to. Jesus was actually speaking about the spiritual water. Also, in John chapter 6, verse 35, Jesus declared, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. Here also, thirsty has a spiritual meaning. That means thirst, the word thirst in John's gospel has a broader understanding, has a broader meaning. Jesus says, I thirst, right after the 3 hours of utter darkness, when he realizes that even God has forsaken him. So Jesus is crying for water, that is true, there is no doubt about it, but he is also crying for fellowship, thirsting for fellowship. That is exactly what we find in Psalm 42, verse 1 and 2, where the psalmist says, as the deer pants for the streams of water, so my soul pants for you, O God. My soul thirsts for God, the living God. There is also another sense in which Christ says, I thirst. Now, we can apply this word to mean he thirsts for people to come into a loving fellowship with him. Notice the Bible's last invitation in Revelation chapter 22, verse 17. Let everyone who is thirsty come. Let them take the water of life as a gift. Let everyone who is thirsty come. It is an invitation. So probably the statement, I thirst, is also an invitation for us either to taste the living water of Christ, or if we have already tasted, it is an invitation for us to partake in the mission of Christ to quench the thirst of others. To be thirst is natural, but not able to quench one's thirst is agonizing. Are we the reason for Christ's thirst on the cross? What have we done to quench his thirst? And thirdly, this word, I thirst, also identifies Christ with the suffering ones in this world. Now, the reference to water and thirst is more relevant in a context where states and countries are fighting for water. Today, millions of people are denied of safe drinking water. So, we cannot ignore the social part of this verse also. It is predicted that the Third World War could be a war for water. It is tragic to see and hear people die of thirst. Water, a natural resource, is commercialized to the extent that the poor are denied access to clean water. Not just the poor. Take, for example, the animals. Now, we can survive through this commercialized structure, but what about the animals and the birds? So, Jesus' thirst not just signifies that he is thirsting for souls to come to him, but also as he hangs there on the cross, he is associating himself with the suffering in the world. Jesus thirsted not because there was no water there, but because the powerful decided to hang him on the cross where he could not afford to have water. Jesus' cry, I thirst, in a sense, is identifying with the millions of people who cry, I thirst daily. Have we ever thanked God for the uninterrupted water resource we enjoy? How much we should be careful with using this resource judicially. It is a time to reflect also on the use of water resources. How different would our attitude be if we are placed in a dry land where there is no plumbing facilities and we have to literally pull water from a well. Now imagine the situations in tribals where people carry several pots on their heads and carry and walk several miles to fetch water. On the day of judgment, we will be judged on the basis of whether we are able to fulfill the basic necessities of the people around us. Now, Matthew chapter 25, verse 35, we cannot ignore this verse. Now, to the right, to the people on the right side, Jesus said, I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. And the righteous people answered, Lord, when did we see you thirsty and give you something to drink? And Jesus replied, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it for me. Often we are worried about the higher spiritual things. We forget these down-to-earth small things that qualify us for heaven. So as we meditate on this word, I thirst, let us also be thankful for the water resources we enjoy and be sensitive to the suffering of the humanity so that we will do everything possible in our capacity to quench Christ's thirst. Amen.